Good evening everyone, my name is Yorkshire Kris and this is Exotic Gardening Live, and in tonight's edition we're going to talk about the plants that we're waking up in spring, because spring is here now and all our tender plants hopefully are stirring, and if you've got any dormant plants we're going to talk about sort of waking them up and sort of promoting new growth. So the weather this week has been really great. I think we've had proper spring-like days. We've had temperatures of up to about 14 degrees up here, probably warmer down south as well. We've had a bit of rain on Friday, but the rest of the time has been nice and dry, and the warmth from the sun, you can start to feel it now. If you're in a nice sheltered corner, get that sun on your skin and it sort of feels quite warm. So the plants in the ground, we're going to talk about them waking up, and we're going to talk about plants that are being kept in dormant state over winter, either dry stored in certain cases, and also plants that have sort of been taken over in a greenhouse or in your house or in a shed or something like that. We're going to talk about waking those up as well. But before we start doing that, I'll just say hello to all the people that have joined the chat already. So hello Alan the cat, who's got a Morelli that's been out all winter and doing well, which is fantastic. Can't guarantee it'll do that every year, and depending on your location I wouldn't advise doing that at all. But if you've got a mild winter and you live in an area where you can overwinter risk Morelli outside, then go for it. Who else we got? We've got Ann Turner. Good evening, Anne. Good evening, Vincenzi Calzoni. I know I pronounced that wrong, so let me know how I pronounce your name, because you do like to watch my videos, which is great, thank you. I like to pronounce your name better in the future. Got Jolie's, hi Jolie's, hi Palms and Exotic UK, hi Rich Hensman, and hi Lee Jones. So I've got a few watching, adding their comments, and hi Aaron as well, thanks for joining us this evening. So yeah, the comments so far about basically spring is on the way, things are warming up, and the plants that have been dormant over winter, if you've kept them in a house or you kept them in a greenhouse and they've sort of been ticking over, then at this point in the year they'll look at the absolute worst, because they've not had any summer heat recently, they've probably not been watered a lot because they've been dormant. The leaves might have dried up, shriveled away, been cut off, and they're looking pretty ropey. But it won't be long before we get more warmth, more sustained warmth, sunlight, be able to water plants, be able to feed plants, and they'll start looking great again. So go through a few of the different types of plants that you might be growing, and I've got a few specimens down here that I want to show you as well, to show you what they're looking like in my greenhouse. Any problems you might have with sort of these plants, if they're looking a bit mushy, are they looking a bit too dry, do you think they're going to survive or not? We'll go through a few sort of issues you might find, and if you've got any specific questions on sort of waking up plants from dormancy, put them in the chat and I'll answer them as we go along. So first plant I want to talk about is aeoniums. So aeoniums, I grow a lot of aeoniums, and the ideal way to overwinter them is to have them nice individual pots, pot them up in really free draining medium, hardly water them at all over winter, keep them on the sunniest windowsill, and then you'll be able to bring them out sort of as we go through April into May into the garden. But I do that with some of mine, but because I've got quite a lot and not too much space, what I'll do with quite a lot is just dig them up and basically just stick them in a bucket or stick them in a container and really not water them much at all. And I've got one here just to show you what they look like. I'm just going to make a bit of a mess in my kitchen. But here, I've not potted up this one. You can see they don't have much of a root ball at all, aeoniums. This was pulled out of the ground last October, November time. And It's got a small root ball here. It's nice and dry, but it's had a bit of moisture over winter from the humidity in the greenhouse that builds up, and also a bit of watering from other plants that have splashed onto it. And you can see it's got very green leaves. Aeoniums, this one here should have like reddish tinged leaves, but over winter, because the light levels are really low, then you get just very green leaves, and you do get lots of leaves falling off. So if I just turn it around, I pulled off quite a lot before I brought it in this evening, but there's 1, 2 dead leaves here that are just hanging off, and you can just pull these off, come off nice and easy, and you can remove them now. And this is the worst aeoniums are going to look all year. So in a month's time I'll be planting these out in pots and in the ground, and they'll look a bit ropey for a while because we still might get a late frost in May, something like that, but it won't be a bad frost in late May. You always put fleece over them, and as soon as you get some good warm sunlight on these, they will colour up really nicely and they'll put on lots of growth. Although people talk about them being winter growers, which they are, as soon as you get them into the ground or in good pots with some decent compost and some grit, they will romp away when they get nice spring sunlight. So that's aeonium. You can see, greener than they should be when they're planted out, and lots of dead leaves, which I've just removed. So if your aeoniums look like that, then that's what mine look like, and in a few weeks to a month's time they'll look a lot better as soon as they're outside. Obviously aeoniums, some people can leave them outside. I've left them outside before and they've got through winter on very mild occasions when they've been near the house and things, but most of the time they won't survive outside if you leave them out in most of the UK. And if you're watching this from America or Europe, continental climates, then you've got no chance really of leaving them outside because they will die as soon as you get down to close to 0 and -3, -4, then it will see them off. So that's one of the plants I've got here. The next one is a plant I think lots of us grow, and you might be thinking, what should they look like over winter? This is a very tatty looking Colocasia. So this is a Colocasia that I had grown in the ground. I literally pulled it up, I shook off all the compost and I stuck it in this pot, and it's not been watered since the end of October last year. So no water, it's been dry stored basically, and it's just pushed out this rubbish little leaf here, and then the first healthy looking leaf is just on the way because we've had warm weather over the last week or so, and it's really sort of started into growth, even though it's not been watered. So this is a Colocasia, I think this is a dark stem hybrid. There's loads of other Colocasias people grow. You've got the really tender stuff, the Hawaiian style ones. You've got the hardy ones like Pink China, and then you've got ones that have got a bit hardiness like the dark stem hybrid and Mammoth as well, that have, that can survive the winter outside in some locations, some winters, but on the whole it's best to lift them up and dry store or keep them going. But whatever Colocasia you've got, probably at this time of year, if you've kept it in growth or you've dry stored it like this, it'll either have no leaves because it's fully been dry stored and you cut off the leaves, or it's sort of been ticking over winter and you'll have 1 or 2 leaves like this and it doesn't look great. Well, as long as the stem itself is nice and firm and the leaves, they're looking like there's some sort of life in them, they will perk up. The one thing that will kill them off pretty quickly is if you sat there in really cold, damp or wet compost in winter, it will just rot them off. So that's why this one's been completely dry stored, so that it doesn't have a chance to rot off. So this is, like I said, this dark stem hybrid. It's got some hardness to it, so it won't, completely collapse like some of the Hawaiian ones will. But it's not, it's not a fully hardy plant, so that's why I dug it up. What I'll do with this soon, well, basically in the next week or so, is I will pot this up properly in some compost. I'll give it some water because it's warm enough now in my greenhouse to start to get some roots into that compost and to get into active growth. So that's the Colocasias that I've sort of been ticking over in the greenhouse. I do have some other of the, like I said, the very tender ones, the Hawaiian style ones, and they're looking like that, with like half a leaf or a bit of a dead leaf. And that's because the light levels are so bad in winter, and obviously it's not warm, that they don't look good at this time of year. So they will be slowly sort of wait for them to wake up properly, because they're in the greenhouse, they've got some heat on them, they're on a heat mat. And when the light levels improve a bit more, then you'll see more active growth, and I'll gradually water them a bit more and more. Still too early to feed them, and it's still too early to properly saturate the compost like you can in summer when it's nice and warm day and night. You can keep these not as bog plants, but you can keep them sort of moist 24/7. The colocasias in the ground, so I've got pink chinas in the ground now. You might be growing pink chinas or some other colocasias that you've had in the ground. You might have mulched them, or you might have not mulched them and just left them open to the elements. Check them now and see what they're looking like. Quite often you'll get some like dried material where the old leaves were and the top of the stems, and if you just sort of press your fingers on that, if it goes all the way through, then you know you've got a rotten top, or just the completely rotten corm. But generally you'll find some resistance there, and it won't have rotten all the way through. You might get a bit of a mushy area, but you'll get some growth from another part of the bulb basically, and some side runners with little bulbs and growth points coming off them. They might be starting to grow now because we've had some warm weather for a week or so, and the light levels are improving. And if it's been under like a straw mulch or something, there'll be some sort of heat given off by the straw as it starts to rot as the weather sort of warms up anyway. So that heat will have generated on the ground and sort of warmed up the plants, and will start into growth. Because I've noticed where I've had straw on some of my colocasias, my pink chinas, I've picked up the straw this weekend and I can see they're actually shooting. You can see some green leaves forming on some of them, not all of them, but some of them. And yes, some of them are mushy as well, because you do get the odd one that does rot through, but on the whole I'd say about 90-95% of all of them look totally fine at the moment. And even the ones where I've not put any mulch, no compost, no straw, or any protection on them, because it's been a mild winter, they all look completely fine. So I'll just check some comments and then we'll move on to the next plant that I've got here. I'll get rid of this soil that I've just brought onto the kitchen table as well. Wow, there's been quite a lot of comments while I've just been talking about colocasias. Hi Carl, hi Yvette, hi Cat Spray, hi Gary, hi James, hi Ritz, hi Tom. So yeah, we've been talking about aeoniums. So Richard's got his aeonium undulatum enjoying itself on a sunny windowsill. I think that's the main thing, going back to aeoniums again. They need the most light you can give them all year round basically, because they don't go dormant, because they do try to grow in winter. So even the ones I've talked about that I've just basically dug up and left in a pot without any extra care over winter, I've put them on the sunniest place I possibly can in the greenhouse, on the top staging. Some I've had to go a bit lower down because I've run out of space, but where possible, try to give them much sun. And if you can treat them as a houseplant over winter, all the better, because then you can give them a bit more water, give them really good sunlight on the south facing window. And if you've got centrally heated home or whatever heating, that background heat will allow it to grow through the winter as well. But they'll still probably be very green, even if it's a black or a red species, just because the light levels aren't strong enough. We'll talk about Ensetes next. So we'll talk about Morellii bananas in a second, because there's some questions about dry storing them, and some not showing signs of life and some looking okay, so we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so Jolie's asking about feeding and putting out in good weather. I'm not certain which plant you're thinking about for that. Generally, you don't want to feed plants unless it's in active growth and you've got sustained nighttime temperatures to keep that active growth going. So for generally, I don't feed stuff until it's planted in the ground. If it's summer bedding or Ensetes that I'm planting out, I'll start feeding basically from end of May into June and carry on feeding into July and August, and then slow down the feeding from then. I don't feed in winter anything at all. The first sort of bit of feed plants get sort of feed, sort of pick me up, is seaweed spray, foliar spray, or seaweed drench. So you get your seaweed extract and I mix it up, dilute it, and I spray the foliage or water with that seaweed mixture in sort of April time when things are starting to move a bit more than what they are now. So things, basically all the plants in my greenhouse will get a watering, general watering with some seaweed added. And that's pretty much everything that's still in there before it comes out. We'll talk about the hardening off process, which is bringing indoor plants outdoors without them going into shock a bit later on in the season. But for now, we're sort of just talking about waking things up. So we'll go on to onset bananas, because I know there's a lot of people that might have not grown these many years. You might have grown them 1 year and this is the first year you've tried to get them through winter. Well, onset bananas, generally most people grow Morellii, so the red Ethiopian banana, and you buy them as small plants and they grow big in a season, and then you've got to think about how you're going to overwinter it. If you've got the space, most people, if it's small, will just keep it ticking over as a house plant maybe, or they'll sort of bring it into a greenhouse, still in compost, still growing a bit. But when they get big, you need to think really how you're going to move them, and dry storing is a really good way of sort of reducing the weight and reducing the size of the plant by cutting off all the foliage, getting off all the soil and compost, and basically getting the plant, which is basically the trunk and the base, and bringing it indoors above 5 degrees ideally, so it's frost free, and we call it dry storing because we're not going to water it over winter whatsoever. So if you've dry stored your onset bananas, which I have done for a couple of mine, then now is a time where they should be looking like they're going to be growing. So if you look at the top of the sort of crispy leaves, the base of the leaves, if you cut them all off in autumn, just scratch away at the papery dead leaves and you should see some green in the centre, and that means it looks like it's alive and it's going to push out some green leaves and foliage. And even onset Morellii, which is a red banana, will probably look quite greenish because the light levels are low at this time of year. And you'll want to start waking it up now, because it will take a few weeks for it to get its roots down and to get its first leaf or two up. So you can basically now bring it out of its dormancy, put it into a pot that's just big enough to accommodate the trunk or the stem, and then put a bit of perlite and compost mixed together in the bottom of the container. Place your banana plants on top, and if your compost has got some moisture in it already, you don't need to give it any water whatsoever. You can just place it on there, put it somewhere warm, somewhere with some decent light, and within a week or so the first leaf should be moving at the very least, and if it's in ideal location then it might start even unfurling. And then the roots will be slowly forming underground as well, the nice white fleshy roots. And then as soon as you've got the first bit of movement from the green leaves, then you can start watering it. You don't need to water it any earlier than that. Some people think, oh, I'll water it and it'll start growing quicker. Well, actually, until it starts showing that it's in active growth, if you add water while it's just sitting there, you got likely that you'll start the plant sort of going backwards and either sitting there in soggy compost, and it can eventually lead to rot. So wait for the active growth. Even if the compost feels dry at the surface, wait for active growth first before you water it. But if you had a small plant overwintered, then it should still be green. So I've got a small onset here. So this is a small division of one I propagated last year. This is onset Haniba, Ventricosum Haniba, and this is a small plant. And if you've had small plants over winter, then you've been able to keep them potted up and sort of keep in active growth. The downside of this is you get loads of green fly and you might have red spider mite. This one here has no red spider mite at all, but it's had green fly, and I've had to spray it a couple of times over winter, get some baby wipes and wipe over the leaves and then cut off the worst leaves. And this hasn't grown fast over winter because it's just been ticking along because the light levels aren't great and it's not been warm. But it's, this leaf here, obviously that's not doing much at the moment because it's half dead. This was one that was sort of was looking bad going into winter, but then it has pushed out this nice new green, quite pale leaf over the last fortnight. So I've got quite a few at this size and a bit bigger. They're in active growth already because they were kept potted up over winter, and they were kept warmer. So some were on my heat mat, and the smallest ones like this were in the propagator, kept at sort of 15 degrees over winter. So that's onsets. If you've got an onset that you've been dry storing, and it's something like, can't show it on the screen, it's big and it's about that sort of width. So we talked about in my videos last season should I say, if you can get your hand around the trunk, the base of the trunk of an onset Morellii, then it's too small to dry store. If you can't get your hands around, so it's like that, then it's big enough to dry store. So if you've got some that you've dry stored and they're not showing any signs of life yet, don't worry, do that scrape test to see if you can see green. Look at the base as well, and the base is a bit funny. You'll notice that the newest roots for this year's growth will actually come out quite high up of the base. You might expect them to come right at the bottom. They'll actually come sort of like at the shoulder, so at the base of the leaves where it meets sort of the root plate, there's an area where the roots will grow, the new roots will grow, and they'll come around the edges all the way around. If you've got a really mushy area on one side and you've got a bit of rot and you're worried, don't be too worried as long as it's nice and firm on the other side and you've got some active roots soon sort of poking out or looking like they're going to poke out soon, so that'll sort of compensate for any areas of rot. If you've got all the base and it's all mushy and you sort of squeeze it and loads of moisture comes out, then it might have failed. You might have lost that plant. If it's really wet right now and you've not kept in a wet location, but it's just looking all mushy, then it's probably rotted all the way through. What you can do, if you don't see any growth and you've brought it into heat now, you can sort of cut down from the top, going down, cut off the top, turn it, look in the centre of it, and obviously it's like rings, like circles of the old leaves into the centre. You've got the new growth. If the centre looks brown or black when you're doing that, it's probably rotten right to the base and you've probably lost it. Again, don't give up too quickly. Cut off a bit more and see if you see some growth when you brought it into some warmth and light. I think normally you get about 75–80% of dry stored onsets through. Sometimes they fail, but most of the time they do get through. But you always lose one. You might have been bashed about when you dug it out and it could have caused some damage that you didn't notice, and that damage has then led to rot. It might have had too much moisture in there, it wasn't dry stored correctly, wasn't left to take all the water out, or you could just be unlucky and it's just rotted away for some other reason. But generally most get through, and as long as you see growth when you bring it into warmth, then it will fully go into growth, fully root when you pot it up and add that moisture when you see that growth. So that's onset bananas. That's from Morellii and Heniba. If you've had the straight species or any other ones like glaucum and things like that, which are more tender, then you've had to keep them warmer over winter, above 10 degrees. If you kept them above 10 degrees, then follow the same sort of techniques I've talked about, the same things to look for. If you kept them too low at the other types of onset, then they might not make it. So generally, Morellii is the easiest one to get through winter because it can cope down to freezing for short periods, and generally if you keep it frost free and dry, it will come through. And if we go back to the first comments we had early on, Alan the cat was talking about his Morellii that is left in the ground, and he's had it 3 years in the ground with a decent sized trunk. We got to 8 foot last year. He's left them out because he bought it as a small plant. He thought it was worth the risk. He lives down the southwest where it is warmer over winter, milder over winter, and he's risked it and he's got it through, so that's great. Like I said earlier, I wouldn't suggest everybody plant out the Morellii and think they'll come through every winter, because 9 times out of 10 for most of the UK and Europe they won't get through. You have to be in a lucky spot, a really nice spot where you've got not too cold temperatures and not too much rain, because it's the moisture, the wetness that will rot off onset in winter more than the cold in some circumstances. Another plant we can talk about is cannas. So cannas, if you've left them in the ground, then they should be showing some signs of life now. You might not see active growth of stems coming out, but if you sort of move away any mulch and compost, have a look and sort of proddle about at the base, you'll see the knobbly old shoots from last year's growth, and you should see some little sort of pinky purple green tiny shoots that should be emerging as well. Give it time. We don't want them to shoot too early because they'll get frosted off, because we're still going to get frost depending where you are for the next month or two. So they'll wake up of their own accord, but they do wake up pretty early in the season on the whole, the cannas. If you've left them, if you've dug them up and you've had them sort of ticking over dormant, you might want to wake them up now. And to be honest, they'll probably be waking up anyway, because like I said, they don't need too much heat to trigger them into active growth, and they will start growing pretty early on. A bit like dahlias as well, they probably will be in active growth now as well if you've stored them somewhere in a greenhouse, because a bit of warm sun on that greenhouse easily gets to 20 degrees in the daytime now, easily. So a few hours at that sort of temperature will start making these plants wake up. And this year actually didn't dig up any of my dahlias or my cannas. They're all in the ground. Some are protected with mulch, straw and old compost. Some I didn't do anything with apart from use the old stems just to die down and go over them. And I've been out this weekend and I can see all the species, as far as I'm aware, haven't rotted through and they look totally fine. You can tell if they've rotted by obviously no growth in the season, but if you look and you get a dark orange or brown or black colour, if you sort of scrape away at the growth points or where the growth points would be. If you get dark colours, then they're probably rotten and they're not going to come back. But there might be other shoots underground, a bit further on, that you've not noticed that might surprise you and come back anyway. Generally, they're not that tender. The foliage is very tender, but the actual rhizomes, they can get through decent cold winters if it's been protected. You might want to lift them, even if you've kept them in the ground. Now is a really good time to lift and divide them, because you can pot them up for a while, or you can just spread them about in the gardens in a month or so's time in new planting positions, and this will reinvigorate the plants. Because if you've had some cannas in the ground in one spot for a few years, then like a lot of plants, they sort of grow outwards, and then the centre might be a bit dead, a bit woody, and they won't get much growth from the centre. So you can sort of chop them up with a spade, and then you can turn them round or move parts of the plant, divide them, give them away, sell them, whatever, and you will reinvigorate the sections that you do replant in your garden. So every 3 or 4 years, if you always keep them in the ground, it is good to do that division, because you'll get more vigour from the plants as a whole. Let's go back to the questions. Let's have a look. Talked about feeding. Can't spray asked about onset. Soggy all the way through. Has it had it? Probably. If it's, like I said, it's hard to show if I don't have one now, but if it's wet and soggy all the way through, then it's probably goner. If it's just wet on the outside and you pull off the oldest mushy leaves and it still feels firm closer in, then it's probably got a decent chance, as long as the base isn't completely mush. And if you cut the top off and you've got the rings in the centre, the middle of the plant, if that's dark brown or black, then it's probably rotted away at the base and the new growth is rotting away. But if it's green all the way through, green or greenish white, and not mushy all the way through, then it's probably got a decent chance. But now is the time really to start waking them up. So early March all the way through to late April are the sort of weeks you want to start waking up your onset, just to get them into some sort of growth so that it's got some roots before you plant it out in the garden. Because you don't want to just plant out a dry stored Enset straight into the garden with no roots, because it'll just sit there, fall over because it's got no support or no roots, and it will probably rot slowly if you don't get those roots growing before you plant it out. So James Reed's asked about his dwarf Cavendish. So Cavendish bananas are the ones that fruit and actually have edible, nice yellow fruits. The general Cavendish is a big plant. You know, it's taller than anybody's room really, unless you've got a super huge tall conservatory. But the dwarf types, it's like a super dwarf. There's a dwarf type. They grow, I think, sort of between 1.5 meters to like 2.5, 3 meters tall. So you might get away keeping it indoors for its full life, and you can always chop back a bit of it as well if it gets too tall. And you've kept it growing, James, through winter, which is great, under a grow light. You think it's too tall for next winter. Well, like I said, it shouldn't get too tall if it's a dwarf type or the super dwarf type, because, like I said, it's a 1.5 meters to about 2 or 3 meters for the super dwarf type and the dwarf type. So hopefully you've got a conservatory that's got that sort of height in certain parts of it. If you've got like a pitch roof, it should be fine. And like I said, you can cut back. Literally, you've got your slender stem. You can cut all the foliage off down to like 1.5 meters if you really want to, and then it'll push out more leaves. And then when it's ready to fruit, it'll stop pushing out leaves and it'll push out a flower, and then it'll fruit. Ideally, don't cut it just before it starts flowering, because you don't want a stem with just one flower at the top and no leaves, because it looks strange and the flower won't last long and you won't get fruit because you haven't got the energy from the leaves to produce that fruit really. So you do want some leaves, so ideally don't cut it back at all, and hopefully you'll have space for it if it is a dwarf type. If you haven't got the dwarf type and it's growing like 4 to 6, trying to grow 4 or 6 meters tall, something like that, then yeah, you're going to really struggle. You're never going to get it to fruit properly because it wants to be a huge plant. Hopefully you've got the dwarf plant, and it's great that you've kept it going through the winter, because they are difficult. You know, you want to keep it above 15 degrees, 18 degrees really, in active growth, and with good light source, like you've treated it, this plant, with its 36 watt grow light on it. So hopefully, fingers crossed, it is going to be able to stay in the house or conservatory, and you're going to get fruits on it next year or two, all being well. So Gary Gleason says he's got 2 very big onset, dry stored out for a week and no sign of life yet. They feel solid, but not really, but look really poor. Am I over worrying? So yeah, like I've talked about already, if it's a big plant, like it's something you're struggling to lift up, and it's not showing life yet, don't worry. You say you brought it out, I'm assuming you don't mean you brought it outside. You don't want to just get, like I said, a dry stored onset, stick it outside and think it's going to grow, because it won't yet. You need to get it looking like it's growing, so getting those roots in. So you need to keep it indoors, greenhouse, covered area, so it's going to get some nice warmth on it when the sun goes on it, and you get that rooting happening first. And don't overwater it, like I keep saying. Do not water a plant without roots. Get the roots started by slightly having moist compost, which most compost, when you get it out of a fresh bag, has got some moisture in it. I'm not talking about squeezing it and it drips out, but you can see it's not like dust or sand. It's got a bit of moisture in the compost when you get it out of a fresh bag. That is all the moisture you need to start these plants into growth. And to be honest, normally, once they warm up, you'll see growth, leaves starting to unfurl on onsets, even if they've been completely dry stored with no compost yet at all, because there's still some moisture in the trunk or the pseudostem to allow that first leaf to push out, even with no watering at all. So get those roots started, warm, before you take it fully outside. And it's still too early to bring them out anyway. So even if you've been sort of had it dry stored and then you can see roots on it, it's still too early to take it outside. So I showed you earlier my little onset here. If you've got anything tiny like this, and this isn't going to go out till May, mid-May, because frost will kill it, and we'll still get frost, right through in my location to the end of April definitely. Is a decent possibility, and even right through May you might get the odd frost on occasion. Noticed a few green fly, I'll just wipe those off. It's just like any summer bedding plants, or petunias, tomatoes, anything like that. It's far, far too early to take these out at this size. If you've got a big onset, then you still need to get it to active growth. That's why we're talking about getting them started now indoors. And then it'll take a few weeks for that rooting process to start and that first leaf to come out. Then when we get into, where are we now? Into April and then into early May, then you can bring them outside. So you need to get that active growth before you take them out. And then you might lose the first leaf. We'll talk about the hardening off process. We'll talk about that later on when we get closer to planting out time. You know, bringing an indoor plant and taking it to the outdoor world without it going into shock. You can be a bit rough with onsets because it grows so quick. So the first leaf you might lose because it's, you know, windier, a bit colder outside than indoors. The first leaf that you've been growing indoors might die quickly. But if it's an active growth and you take it outside, sort of, you know, end of April into May, then new leaves will come out and they'll be far tougher than any leaves that have been grown indoors. Gingers, we haven't talked about gingers yet. Gingers a bit like cannas. So you've got ones that you've kept in the ground, they'll be dormant, they'll be waking up later than cannas. They need more heat, they need more sustained warmer temperatures at night time to get them into growth. So cannas, if you look around, might be starting to show some growth already, and they'll be showing growth, you know, by the end of April, definitely. Whereas gingers, like I said, they need that constant warmth for longer, so they might not be showing until May or even early June in cold spots, if you've left them in the ground. I've got a ginger here, which is one that sort of is a evergreen ginger. Some gingers naturally lose the leaves in autumn. They're sort of deciduous or semi-deciduous. They will go dormant of their own accord. There are other gingers that just are always trying to grow, so effectively evergreen. I've got one here and I'm showing you what it looks like and what I'm going to do with it. This one I'm about to show you is Hedychium verity, and as you can see, it doesn't look great at this time of year. It's been kept in the greenhouse and it's been kept with some foliage on, but you can see the oldest shoots that came last autumn are going yellow and dying off, and even the freshest sort of shoot that came sort of, well, the last bit of growth before winter here, this is looking a bit ropey. But it doesn't matter, because what's going to happen soon is, if I lift it up, I'm going to cut all this foliage off anyway. It's just been slowly ticking over winter, photosynthesizing slowly, and keeping the plant going. It's rooted, it's in compost, this. But if we look at the base already, we've got shoots coming. So we've got one here, and we've got 2 or 3 around the back as well. So I'll cut these off in the next week or two, and all the new shoots will quickly come up and make this a decent plant before it goes back out in the garden. And the ones in the ground, like my Forestii, and we've got some, I think, Assam orange as well, they will just wake up of their own accord as we go through April into May. They are slow to get going, and if you protected them for the ones that are not fully hardy, then again, don't worry unless you've got no growth by sort of middle of June. So that is gingers. Are there any other plants that people want to ask about waking up? Put it in the comments now and we'll discuss them. Well, I just have a bit of a drink. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, hi Aaron again. So I'm glad your onset's coming through. So I had a bit of rot, but it's coming good now, which is great to hear. fantastic. Riz Mirza, hi there, you have got some banana seeds, I want to give them a go. Should I start them in a propagator? Yes, so banana seeds, generally, you can start them any time of year because it can be really erratic to germinate. I've got a video showing a good way to get them to germinate more consistently and probably a bit quicker. So that's the one where we're talking about putting them into some fruit juice, soaking them in fruit juice, using cinnamon powder to stop them rotting, and then put them in heated propagator. Generally, on set banana seeds need constant heat, and you want warm temperatures, so it needs to be like 25-30 degrees, even 35 degrees, if you can get a propagator that can do those temperatures. Whereas most Musa bananas, if you're growing them from seed, then they want a bit of a fluctuation in temperatures, so you want warm days, so yeah, 25 degrees or more in the day, and then cooler, sort of like 15 degrees at night. So a windowsill works great because it's really hot on a windowsill in the daytime and it cools down at night time, so that's great from this time of year onwards because you can do that. In winter, if you were sowing your seeds, then you need to have a heated propagator basically on a timer so that it's really hot for a few hours, for half the day, and then cool on an evening, but not too cold. You don't want it to go down to like 5-10 degrees really. You want it to keep about 15 or so at night and up to 25 to 30 in the daytime. But the main thing with banana seeds are you need fresh seeds. If you've got old seeds, then they're going to be really erratic to germinate, and they can take years sometimes. You might get one germinate in 2 months, and you might get the next germinate, if you can be bothered to wait, like 3 or 4 years later in some circumstances. I've heard of people basically forget about seeds and they've taken like 5-6 years to germinate all the onset seeds. If you've got old seeds, they can just take ages. So you want fresh seeds for really constant, good germination quickly, because they can germinate literally in like a week or so if you've got fresh seeds. What else we got? Hi Joe, asking about Tetrapanax seedling from last year. Can you plant it out? Yes, you can plant it out. I wouldn't do it yet because I'm guessing you got two. You might have it in active growth already as a seedling indoors. If you stick it outside now, those leaves will get frosted off, and it's probably not big enough to look after itself after a big frosting off at this time of year. And if it's fully dormant, then there's no point planting it out quite yet. Because it's still, you're still going to get frost. Big plants that have been in the ground for ages can look after themselves. They can deal with frost because they'll blacken off the newest foliage, but they've got enough energy in the stem and the roots to push out new leaves after a few frostings, and they'll get really motoring as we get into the end of April into May. If you've got a tiny seedling or a small plant, I wouldn't plant it out until the back end of April into May, really. It might survive if you plant it out now, but you're not giving it the best possible start to life outdoors. These are hardy plants for most of us, but you don't want to put tiny plants straight into the ground quite yet. Hi Kathy Baker from Columbus, Ohio. Thanks for watching. In Zone 6, so for those that know about the zones, Zone 6 is pretty cold winters. And if you live in an area where we don't talk about zones, like the UK, we don't do zones as such because we're a maritime rather than continental climate, then Zone 6 means you're going to get a lot of cold. I don't know the exact temperatures because then obviously in America talking Fahrenheit, and Europe mainly talks about Celsius. So in Celsius, I think Zone 6 is something lower than like -10 in winter for quite an extended period of time and lots of snow. But your question is about waking up 90-year-old dahlia seeds. Obviously, I've not got experience of germinating seeds at 90 years old. I know some plants have been brought back to life or germinated after hundreds, if not thousands of years in certain circumstances. So definitely try. You can try any seeds and see if they're viable. Dahlia seeds normally germinate really quickly. I've had them germinate in like 24 hours. and then show leaves within like a week or so. So they do germinate quickly if they're alive, basically. So yeah, just try them into some normal compost. I always add perlite for drainage. Surface sow your daily seeds, and then maybe sprinkle a bit of vermiculite or sieved compost over the top. Water them, and they should start into growth within a month at the very latest, but probably in a week or two if the seed is viable. Good luck with the daily seeds, and you've had them 90 years, or you've found at your great grandparents' house. So amazing to think they're 90 years old. Hopefully they will germinate for you, but obviously I don't have the experience of growing seeds at 90 years old, so we'll see how they get on. And next couple of questions. Okay, this is a good one. So Marcin Zarkowski asked about angel trumpets or brugmansias. I've shown them in previous videos. In some years I've kept them growing over winter. This year I went down the route of making them dormant by letting them basically take a little bit of frost, cut off all the leaves, brought them into the greenhouse, kept them pretty dry in a pot, and now, like a lot of other plants in the greenhouse, now we've had some sunny days, warm up the temperatures, green shoots are appearing on the base framework, the stems of the brugmansias. So Marcin talks about it's lost all its leaves, the one that's kept indoors. They do that anyways. If you try to keep them into growth, if they've not got ideal humidity and everything, then they will lose leaves over winter because it's dark in winter. And it doesn't matter too much as long as if you scratch the stems and you've got green just underneath, then you know it's alive. As soon as you get warmer temperatures, you can water it now if it's been in a pot with roots that have been alive. And then you'll see that it gets into active growth within a matter of days, basically, when we get some sunshine on them. So mine have got loads of shoots over the framework. They've not put out active big leaves yet or big new stems off the old wood, but you can see that they're alive. And even if you've got one that's not showing any above ground growth, or it's you've got rotted away old stems and it's just died away, they will shoot from the ground or below ground quite easily. You need some decent cold to really kill off a full brugmansia. So if you kept it frost free in a greenhouse, but all the stems are completely dry and there's no sign of green, then still wait a while. Once it's warmed up, you'll probably find it'll get shoots coming from below ground level. If you've kept it outdoors in a pot in a cold location and it looks dead, it probably won't shoot from the base because you might have died if it's been a cold winter where you are. But if you've kept it indoors frost free and there's some sort of sign of green, then it will come back, and it shouldn't take too long now. The temperatures are warming up. And don't worry that it's lost all its leaves. As long as when you water it and it's got some green, like I said, it will come back. Hi James Reed, talking about gunneras starting to growth, but you've got some frost damage on the first leaf. So gunneras are tough plants. They will get frosted. There's loads of plants in your garden that are hardy that will get frosted with their first leaves. Even plants like ivy, which I'm not saying is a tropical plant, an exotic looking plant. It's a it's a British native. The fresh leaves of ivy, when they start growing, when we get a decent frost, will blacken off those leaves. But an ivy plant is completely hardy. And the same with Gunnera manicarta and Tinctoria. They're, in the UK, they're classed as hardy because they're never going to get really, really cold. That will get into them like -15 or below. Could kill them off. They'll definitely fine down to -10, which is what most of the UK might see as their ultimate low. So the first leaves will be starting to move now. You'll start seeing growth on your gunneras. If you haven't checked, go out and check when it's daytime. If you protected it, take off the old dead leaves or the protection, and you'll see signs of growth already because they've been stirring for a few weeks already. The first leaves, as they start coming out, they start off pretty small like this, and then they get absolutely huge, a couple of meters across. They will get frosted now, no doubt. Unless you're in a frost-free location, the first leaves of a gunner will get frosted. They'll look tatty and they'll die off. It doesn't matter too much because, like with the Tetrapanax, there's loads of energy in the plant and it'll push out leaf after leaf after leaf until all the frosts have passed, and then it'll push out more leaves and you'll forget about, you know, the early leaves that you lost early in the season when you get to summer, because it looked like an amazing plant. So don't worry about the first leaves. I've not taken off the old leaf protection that I put on my gunners last winter, but within the next week or two I can expect that the new growth will be pushing away that protection anyway, and they will get frosted, and will get frosted probably all the way through April. But then as we get into May and we get less and less frost, then the new leaves will just replace their old frosted leaves, and it's not an issue at all. So don't worry about it. You can take the protection off now if you really want, or you can just let the plants do it anyway and push away the protection. So a couple more questions before we wrap up. Let's have a look. Sam Potter touches on something that I talked about earlier, which is onset Morellii plug plants, so small onset Morellii. I'm talking about keeping them as houseplants like the one we've got down here, and talking about bringing them out and hardening them off. It's still too early, unless you live on the south coast or the middle of London. I would say it's still too early to do that. Small plants that are tender will get more affected by cold and frost than bigger plants, because they've got less energy and they've got less bulk to sort of, you know, keep away the frost into the centre of the plants. So it's far too early to harden them off. You can move them from your house to a heated greenhouse. I wouldn't put them in the unheated greenhouse yet. I would still wait until your location, wherever you are, is not seeing frost. So yes, you might get a dip down to 0, and an unheated greenhouse, it'll probably be fine because it will bounce back and warmer temperatures very quickly after it gets down to 0 in spring, because it's nice strong sunlight as we move into April. I wouldn't put them out yet. I would wait until, you know, well into April before bringing them out into the greenhouse and then into outdoor in May and June. But it really depends on your location. Some people get away with bringing them out now, but probably not for most of us. So I've got one more question. I shall have a look and we'll do one more. Okay, so last question, James Reed. So Cannas seeds sprouted using the hot water method, fantastic. So yeah, Cannas are easy to grow from seed. I use the hot water method. I've done a video on that, but basically you get your seeds, you pour boiling water on them for like 30 seconds, you cool them down, you sow them, and you'll germinate really quickly. But James has found that it's got white mould over them, and no sign of life after they've started sprouting. That is not a good sign. So there's various things that can happen. Once they've germinated, you can get dampening off disease. So a fungal infection will kill off seedlings. This mainly happens when they're too wet, there's not enough airflow, or it's too cool. So that might have happened. Yeah, you know, you might have to start again. If you've got mold growing over the sprouted seedlings and you've got no further sign of life, then they're probably a goner. You want to see, you know, active growth all the way from germination. You've got to keep it growing then until it's a plant with its roots and its shoots and its leaves. Then it's a bit more robust and it can take fluctuating temperatures. The first, you know, few weeks are critical, where you've germinated your seeds. You want to keep it. It's not too wet, not too dry, not too hot and not too cold, and not too sunny and not too shady. So that's the difficult stage, is getting from seedlings germinating to decent sized plants. That's where it's the most vulnerable. You've got to get everything right at that point. So that is it for this week. So we've gone through lots of different plants, talking about waking them up, talking about, you know, some things that might not have gone right. I've answered quite a lot of questions. Hopefully you've enjoyed the show and you've got some decent information out of it. Thank you for watching. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel. It does really help. And then, yeah, thank you for watching and join me next week.